Michael Harrison, billionaire heir to a $15 billion empire, walked into his own luxury restaurant disguised as a construction worker to test his staff. He ordered a $300 Wagyu ribeye. When the waitress served it, she slipped a note under his fork. 8 words that froze his blood. I know who you are. Your daughter is in danger. He looked up and recognized her. Rebecca, the woman he'd loved and abandoned 15 years ago to marry an heiress. The woman who disappeared pregnant with his child. But that wasn't the real shock. 2 men in dark suits entered the restaurant. Hitmen Michael had hired for a separate job. Except now they were scanning the room, looking at waitresses. Then Michael saw her. A 14-year-old girl with his exact gray eyes carrying bread from the kitchen. Elena, the daughter he never knew existed. And the hitmen? They didn't work for him anymore. They worked for his wife Victoria, who discovered Elena's existence and ordered her execution to protect their legitimate daughter's inheritance. Michael had 60 seconds to save a daughter he'd just met from assassins hired by the woman sleeping in his bed. This story has everything. Hidden children, deadly wives, and impossible choices. What city are you watching this video from and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. Michael Harrison, heir to a $15 billion empire, entered the luxury restaurant of his hotel in New York City, dressed as a construction worker. He wanted to test the service without being recognized. He ordered the most expensive ribeye on the menu, a $300 Wagyu steak. But when the waitress arrived with the plate, she discreetly slipped a note under his fork. Michael's hands trembled reading those 8 handwritten words. I know who you are. Your daughter is in danger. He looked up in terror. The waitress, a 40-year-old woman in an impeccable uniform, was looking at him with eyes he knew, eyes he hadn't seen in 15 years. It was Rebecca, the woman he had loved and destroyed to marry an heiress. The woman who had disappeared pregnant with his child. But that wasn't the real shock. The maitre d' was approaching with 2 men in dark suits. They weren't customers. They were the hitmen Michael had hired to eliminate a business problem. And now they were looking at Rebecca. In that moment, he understood. The daughter the note mentioned wasn't his daughter Sarah, safe in the mansion. It was the daughter he didn't know he had. And Rebecca had just condemned her to death by serving him that ribeye. The Imperial restaurant at the Plaza Hotel shone like a jewel in the heart of New York City that November night. The baccarat crystal chandeliers projected golden reflections over tables set with fine china and solid silver. Michael Harrison was seated at table 17, the discreet corner one he had specifically chosen for his little charade. He was 45 years old but looked 35, thanks to personal trainers, cosmetic surgeons, and a life dedicated to absolute control. The Harrison Empire, built from nothing in 20 years, dominated the American luxury market. But that night, Michael wasn't wearing his usual tailored suits. Worn jeans, a plaid shirt bought at a flea market, work boots stained with fake mud. He wanted to test whether his staff treated all customers with the same respect, regardless of appearance. It was a game he played often, this pantomime of the millionaire disguised as a poor man. It gave him a thrill of power to know he could buy the entire restaurant with a check while the waiters looked at him with poorly disguised contempt. Normally it ended with mass firings and a complete restructuring of customer service. But that night the game took a turn Michael could never have predicted. When the waitress approached to take the order, the world seemed to stop. She wasn't one of the usual Eastern European girls who populated New York's luxury restaurants. She was a 40-year-old woman, brown hair pulled back in a perfect bun, dignified despite the service uniform. But it was the eyes that paralyzed Michael. Honey-colored eyes with golden flecks that he had seen for the last time 15 years before, the night he had chosen money over love. Rebecca Martinez, the woman he had loved in college, the woman he had abandoned when Victoria Rothschild's father had offered to merge their empires if Michael married his daughter. The woman who had disappeared into nothing after he told her with calculated cruelty that she wasn't enough for the future he had planned. She recognized him in the same instant. Michael saw the flash of shock in her eyes, immediately replaced by a mask of glacial professionalism. Her hands didn't tremble as she noted the order. Her voice didn't waver as she confirmed the doneness of the ribeye. But when she leaned over to pour the water, she slipped the note under the fork with a movement so fluid that no one noticed. Michael waited for her to move away before reading. 8 words that froze his blood. I know who you are. Your daughter is in danger. His first thought was for Sarah, his 14-year-old daughter, safe in the fortified mansion outside New York with her mother Victoria. But then he looked at Rebecca serving another table and understood. The way she avoided his gaze, the tension in her shoulders, the quick calculation in his mind. 15 years ago, the breakup, Rebecca's disappearance. Before he could fully process the implication, he noticed movement at the restaurant door. 2 men in dark Armani suits entered with the controlled walk of professional predators. Michael recognized them immediately. They were the Torres brothers, the hitmen he had hired through intermediaries to eliminate Marcus Webb, the business partner who threatened to reveal the financial irregularities of the Harrison empire. They shouldn't be there. They shouldn't know where he was. Yet the maitre d' was leading them to a table with a perfect view of the entire restaurant. Their eyes methodically scanned the room, stopping at each waitress. Michael understood with crystalline horror what was happening. Someone had discovered the existence of an illegitimate daughter. Someone wanted to use her as leverage against him, and the Torres brothers weren't there for Webb. They were there to find and eliminate a girl Michael didn't even know existed until 30 seconds ago. Rebecca returned with the ribeye, a grilled meat masterpiece valued at $300 that now seemed like ash in Michael's mouth. She leaned over to place the plate and whispered quickly. Elena. Her name is Elena. 14 years old. She's in the apartment above the kitchen. She knows nothing about you. Michael grabbed Rebecca's wrist under the table, feeling the accelerated pulse under his fingers. The Torres brothers had settled in and were ordering wine, but their eyes kept moving, searching. The decision was made when he saw a girl enter through the kitchen door. 14 years old, dark hair like Rebecca, but with Michael's same gray eyes. Elena, his daughter, wore a kitchen apron and carried a tray of fresh bread, unaware that 2 professional assassins were about to identify her. Michael stood from the table with studied calm, leaving $500 in cash next to the untouched ribeye. He walked toward the bathroom with the slightly staggering gait of someone who had drunk too much. A perfect performance he had perfected in years of negotiations where feigning weakness was a weapon. Instead of entering the bathroom, Michael slipped through the staff door that Rebecca had strategically left ajar. He found himself in a service hallway that smelled of grease and sautéed food, a parallel world to the brazen luxury of the main room. Rebecca was waiting for him, her face a mask of barely contained rage. The story came out in whispered fragments as they climbed the service stairs toward the apartment. After Michael left her, Rebecca had discovered she was pregnant. She had tried to contact him, but he had changed all his numbers, had lawyers respond. Proud and hurt, she had decided to raise Elena alone. She had studied at night to get a degree in economics while working as a waitress during the day. Elena was brilliant, top of her class, scholarships to the best universities in New York. But a month ago, everything had changed. A man had shown up at the apartment claiming to be a talent scout for a modeling agency. He had asked questions about Elena, about her family, about the father. Rebecca had lied, said the father had died, but the man had smiled as if he knew the truth. Since then, she had noticed people following her. Silent phone calls. The constant feeling of being watched. They reached the apartment, a modest but clean 2-bedroom flat above the restaurant's kitchens. Elena was sitting at the kitchen table, bent over math books, so concentrated she didn't hear them enter. Michael felt his heart stop seeing her up close. She was beautiful in her adolescent simplicity, but above all she had his same concentration wrinkle between her eyebrows, the same way of biting the pen while thinking. Rebecca coughed and Elena looked up. Her gray eyes, identical to Michael's, widened seeing a stranger in her apartment. Before Rebecca could respond, Michael's phone vibrated. A message from his head of security. The Torres brothers have left the restaurant. They're heading up to the upper floors. Panic exploded in Michael's chest. There was no time for explanations, reconciliations, for the truth. He grabbed Elena by the shoulders, ignoring her cry of protest. He explained quickly that he was a friend of her mother's, that she was in danger, that she had to come with him immediately. Elena looked at her mother, seeking confirmation. Rebecca felt tears finally breaking her composure. She told her daughter to go with him, that she would explain everything later, to trust her. Heavy footsteps were heard in the hallway. The Torres brothers had found the apartment. Michael looked frantically around. The window overlooked a side alley, a 10-foot drop onto dumpsters. Not ideal, but feasible. He opened the window and turned to Elena. The girl was trembling, but in her eyes was a determination Michael recognized as his own. He told her to jump, that he would catch her. Elena didn't hesitate. She climbed onto the windowsill and jumped. Michael caught her, the weight making him stagger but not fall. A second later, Rebecca landed beside them with the grace of someone who had spent a lifetime dodging problems. The apartment door exploded. Shouts were heard, orders yelled, the sound of overturned furniture. Michael took Elena's hand and they ran through the maze of alleyways behind Broadway, 3 figures fleeing into the New York night, while behind them hell broke loose. The refuge was a penthouse Michael maintained under a false name in the Upper East Side, bought years before for encounters Victoria shouldn't know about. Irony of fate. Now it served to hide the family Victoria didn't know existed. Elena was sitting on the white leather sofa, still in shock, while Rebecca paced like a caged tigress. Michael had activated all his contacts. The head of security was investigating how the Torres brothers had discovered Elena. His lawyers were preparing documents for legal paternity recognition. But first of all, he had to face the storm that was about to fall on his life. It was Elena who broke the silence with the question they all feared. She asked him directly if he was her father. The devastating simplicity of the question left Michael breathless. He looked at this girl who was his flesh and blood, who had lived 14 years without him, who now looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and resentment that broke his heart. The truth came out like blood from a wound. His love for Rebecca in college, Victoria's father's ultimatum, marry her or lose the opportunity to build the empire you dream of, the cowardly choice of money over love, years of empty success, the cold marriage with Victoria, his daughter Sarah raised as a stranger in a museum house. Elena listened in silence, but Rebecca exploded. 15 years of repressed rage came out in a torrent of cutting words. She reminded him of the promises he had made, the dreams they had shared, how he had looked her in the eyes and told her she wasn't worth enough, how she had had to rebuild herself from scratch, work 3 jobs to support Elena, give up her career to be both mother and father. But the most devastating revelation came from Michael's phone. The head of security had discovered who had ordered the hit on Elena. It wasn't an external enemy. It was Victoria, the perfect wife, the business princess Michael had married out of interest, had discovered Elena's existence through a private detective and had decided to eliminate the threat to Sarah's inheritance before it became public. The Torres brothers didn't work for Michael. They worked for his wife. The betrayal was total. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. Victoria, whom Michael believed too cold and distant to feel strong emotions, had orchestrated the murder of an innocent teenager to protect her true daughter's status. And Michael, in his arrogance, had unwittingly provided the hitmen by hiring them for Webb. Elena looked at her father with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than her 14 years. She asked him if his wife wanted to kill her because she existed. Michael responded with a conviction he had never felt for anything in his life, that he wouldn't allow it, that she was his daughter and he would protect her. Rebecca asked bitterly how he would do it. Hide her forever? Buy her a new identity? Or eliminate his wife like he wanted to eliminate his partner? Michael felt the weight of his choices crushing his chest. He had built an empire on the ruthless ability to eliminate obstacles without remorse. But now, looking at Elena, he understood that everything he had built was worth nothing if he couldn't protect. This girl he didn't know but already loved with primitive ferocity. The next 72 hours were a chess game played with human lives as pieces. Michael activated resources he had never used. He called in favors he had saved for business apocalypse. The Torres brothers disappeared, called away by someone more powerful than Victoria, Spain's best lawyers worked day and night to create an unassailable legal strategy, but the real battlefield was the Harrison mansion outside New York City. Michael returned home the third night, finding Victoria in her glass and steel study, beautiful and lethal as a poisonous orchid. She was drinking champagne while looking at the illuminated gardens, as if she hadn't ordered the murder of a child. The confrontation was surgical in its brutality. Michael put the evidence on the table. Recordings of Victoria's calls with the Torres brothers, bank transfers, photographs of Elena under surveillance. Victoria didn't deny it. What's more, she smiled with a coldness Michael had never seen in her. She explained with terrifying calm how she had always known he didn't love her, how she had accepted the marriage as a business transaction. But Sarah was hers, only hers, and she wouldn't allow any bastard to threaten her daughter's inheritance. "It's business," she said, "like everything in your life." Michael looked at this woman with whom he had shared a bed for 14 years and didn't recognize her, or perhaps saw her for the first time. Victoria wasn't the ice princess he had always believed. She was a predator who had hidden her teeth behind Chanel lipstick and cover-worthy smiles. The negotiation that followed was worthy of a war treaty. Immediate divorce. Victoria would keep 40% of the Harrison empire and exclusive custody of Sarah. In exchange, she would recognize Elena and guarantee her safety. Any move against Elena or Rebecca would be considered a declaration of war, and Michael had enough recordings to destroy her. Victoria accepted with the same emotion with which she signed million-dollar contracts. But before leaving, she dropped the final bomb. She told him that Sarah knew everything, that she had told her that her father had another family, that he had always betrayed them, that she didn't want to see him again. Michael felt the blow like a physical punch. Sarah, the daughter he had raised in luxury but without love, now hated him for having betrayed a family that had never been real. The irony was atrocious. 2 weeks later, Michael was sitting in a modest apartment in Greenwich Village that he had rented for Rebecca and Elena. They were no longer in immediate danger, but their lives had changed irrevocably. Elena attended a new private school under discreet escort. Rebecca had left her job at the restaurant, reluctantly accepting Michael's financial support. But money couldn't buy what had been lost. Elena looked at Michael with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. She finally had a father, but he was the same man who had caused all this chaos. Rebecca maintained a professional distance, accepting his presence for Elena's sake, but rejecting any attempt at personal approach. It was during one of these awkward visits that Michael's phone rang. It was Sarah. His 14-year-old daughter's voice was cold as her mother's. She told him she wanted to meet her other daughter. Michael was taken by surprise. Victoria had painted Elena as the enemy, yet Sarah wanted to meet her. He looked at Elena, who was doing homework at the kitchen table, and made a decision that could destroy everything or save everything. The meeting was organized on neutral territory, a cafe near Central Park. 2 14-year-old girls, one raised in extreme luxury, the other in middle-class dignity, sat across from each other while their parents watched nervously. Sarah arrived in a Bentley with a chauffeur, dressed in Prada from head to toe. Elena arrived by subway, in jeans and a school hoodie, yet when they looked at each other, they saw the same thing, the gray eyes of the father they shared. The conversation started stiff, formal. Then Sarah asked the question that changed everything. She asked if Elena was angry with him for not being there. Elena thought about it and replied that no. She was angry because now he was here and had ruined the life they had. Sarah laughed, a bitter sound too mature for her years. She said at least Elena had had a life. She had only had a gilded prison. The 2 girls looked at each other, and in that moment, something was born. Not friendship, not yet, but understanding. Both were victims of adult choices, pawns in games they hadn't chosen to play. They began meeting secretly from Victoria. Sarah told Elena what it was like to grow up with everything but without love. Elena taught Sarah how to take the subway, buy from street vendors, live without bodyguards, Michael. And Rebecca watched them amazed at how these 2 girls were building a bridge. The adults couldn't cross. 6 months after that, night in the restaurant that had changed everything, Michael Harrison was sitting in a very different office from the glass tower he had dominated. It was a normal building in the financial district, headquarters of the new Harrison Foundation for Education. He had sold 50% of his business shares, using the profits to create something meaningful. Elena was sitting across from him explaining her project for a mentorship program for disadvantaged youth. At 14 and a half, she already had the vision and determination Michael recognized in himself, but tempered by the compassion she had inherited from Rebecca. The father-daughter relationship had been built slowly, brick by brick. It wasn't easy. Elena didn't forget 14 years of absence, and Michael didn't know how to be a father without buying affection. But they were learning, he to listen, she to forgive. Rebecca had accepted a position at the foundation as operations director. Her economics degree, earned at night while raising Elena, finally served for something. She worked with Michael maintaining iron professional boundaries. But sometimes, when they discussed a particularly passionate project, Michael saw flashes of the girl he had loved in college. The real miracle was the relationship between Elena and Sarah. The stepsisters had become inseparable, united by the strangeness of their situation. Sarah had openly defied Victoria, threatening to reveal the murder attempts if she wasn't allowed to see Elena. Victoria, always pragmatic, had yielded. Better a rebellious daughter than one in prison for complicity in attempted murder. The Harrison empire continued to prosper, now divided between Michael and Victoria, like two separate but not hostile kingdoms. The Cold War had become an armed peace, maintained by the mutually assured destruction of the information each had about the other. But it was a November afternoon, exactly 1 year after the restaurant encounter, when the circle closed unexpectedly. Michael had been invited to dinner at the Greenwich Village apartment. Rebecca was cooking. Elena was setting the table. Sarah had arrived in secret from her mother. For the first time, they all sat together as, not a traditional family, but something new. During dinner, Elena raised her glass of orange juice. She said she wanted to make a toast to them, that they weren't a normal family, but they were a family. Dysfunctional, complicated, born of chaos, but real. Sarah added that she toasted to sisters you choose instead of sisters you're given. Rebecca, reluctantly but genuinely, raised her glass and toasted to second chances, even when we don't deserve them. Michael looked at these three women, the woman he had betrayed, the daughter he had ignored, the daughter he hadn't known, and understood that he had lost an empire to gain something infinitely more valuable. He toasted to the truth, even when it arrives written on a note under a ribeye. They all laughed. Even Rebecca. It was a beginning, not a happy ending. There were still open wounds, trust to rebuild, years of absence to compensate for. But in that moment, in that modest Greenwich Village apartment, 4 broken people were building something new from the ruins of their previous lives. Michael's phone rang. It was his former head of security with news about Marcus Webb, the partner he had originally wanted to eliminate. Webb had been arrested for fraud without need of the Torres brothers. Michael turned off the phone without answering. That world, the world where you ordered murders during business lunches, no longer belonged to him. As New York glowed outside the window, ancient and eternal like the human problems it contained, Michael Harrison understood the most important lesson of his life. Sometimes you enter a restaurant to test the service and discover that the real test is you. Sometimes a waitress with a note can save more than a life. She can save a soul. And sometimes, just sometimes, losing everything you've fought for is the only way to find what's worth living for. Elena was right. They weren't a normal family. They were a family born of chaos, of betrayal, of attempted murder, of lies. But they were also a family born of truth, of the courage of a mother who had protected her daughter alone, of the determination of 2 sisters to know each other despite everything, of a man's ability to change when he thought it was too late. And as they washed dishes together, the millionaire, the waitress, the heiress, and the bastard, laughing at Sarah's silly joke, Michael understood that this moment was worth more than all his billions, because in the end, it's not money that defines a man. It's the choices he makes when a waitress hands him a note that says, "I know who you are. Your daughter is in danger." And Michael Harrison, for the first time in his life, had chosen correctly. Give it a like if you believe that the truth, however painful, always sets you free. Comment with the moment that impacted you most. Share for all the fathers who still have to meet their children. Subscribe for more stories of redemption and second chances. Sometimes a note under a ribeye can save a life. Sometimes the enemy is the person you sleep with. And sometimes, just sometimes, losing an empire is the fair price to find a family.